See, it's going down. It's going down like young Jock. I'm telling you, Caitlin Clark was pissed off. She was not happy with the substitutions being taken out every 2 minutes, and she voiced it after the game. She slammed Stephanie White and the Indiana Fever, said, hey, look, I didn't know nothing about this. This was not a part of my plan. I don't know what the hell is going on.
The sports world is just now starting to realize the full scope of what transpired when something inside the Indiana Fever organization suddenly broke. This isn't a tale of two individuals who just don't agree on tactics, a poor game, or a difficult period of time. The institutional breach that occurred behind closed doors in Indiana is the type that makes franchisees make actions they will never be able to undo. A seasoned athlete waged battle on her own coaches. The individuals hired to defend a celebrity openly discredited her. Additionally, a whole locker room reached a breaking point that cannot be covered up by corporate damage management. The explosion that everyone had anticipated has finally happened, and the shockwaves are traveling more quickly than anybody in the front office can manage. You need to go past the actual conflict in order to see why this scenario erupted so forcefully. You must comprehend what it's like to be the most talked about, watched, and financially valued athlete in women's basketball and still have your own company treat you like a burden. This franchise's foundation has been undermined by that psychological paradox for months, and when the walls eventually collapsed, it did so with great force. It started out as a subtle source of annoyance in the locker room and has since grown to the point that head offices around the league are really concerned about it. Because it can occur elsewhere if it can occur here, with this athlete, and under this degree of public attention. Elite scorers are subjected to a certain type of basketball torment that is unrelated to strict defense or physical punishment. The rhythm kill is the cause. Pulling a shooter off the ground at the precise moment when her body temperature is increasing and her shot mechanics are coming together is the methodical, planned procedure. A player of Caitlin Clark's offensive caliber requires consistent time on the court to develop the momentum that makes her truly unstoppable, as any serious basketball student will tell you. The foundation of her game is the ability to analyze defenses in real time, establish range, and put opponents under psychological strain. In 2-minute periods, none of it occurs. But that's just what she was given, game after game. After 2 minutes, whistle and return to the bench. After 3 minutes, whistle and return to the bench. Repeatedly, like a metronome with the incorrect speed. The pattern was so mechanical and constant that it ceased to resemble a cautious return routine and began to resemble something else other. When reporters questioned Clark about the setup following the game, she didn't hold back. She was quite clear that this wasn't her original concept. I didn't make that choice. That choice was made by someone else. I didn't do it. That's not what I want to do. It wasn't a gentle landing. It is not insignificant for a franchise player to openly criticize her own coach's strategy in front of the cameras. That is a warning flare aimed straight at the front desk. She went on to describe the inner experience of that rotation from a human perspective. Playing for 3 minutes, getting substituted out, playing for 3 more minutes, and then sitting on the bench is quite difficult. Getting into the flow is quite difficult. She said that she received respectable glances on certain items, but the vibe was just lacking. Continuity is necessary for her game's connective tissue, instinctual readings, spatial awareness, and automatic shot selection. You won't be seeing Caitlin Clark play basketball if you remove the continuity. You are witnessing a purposefully crippled version of her who has been chastised for not being able to fly. The contrast between what Clark was saying and what Coach Stephanie White was concurrently telling the media made the situation even more difficult to accept. Any player coming from a 2-week hiatus requires time to regain physical stamina, according to White, who cited endurance as the primary justification for the limited minutes. In theory, it makes sense. The issue is that Clark made it clear to reporters that her body felt Oklahoma. My body feels fantastic overall. That's the good thing about today, then. When discussing the same game, 2 members of the same team described 2 entirely distinct physical worlds. This type of public disconnect between a top player and a head coach doesn't just happen. It occurs when communication has already deteriorated to the point where neither party feels the need to coordinate their narrative. The coaching staff committed a psychological error in addition to a tactical one. They have a basic misperception of the room's temperature. They worked on the presumption that the players on that roster would accept any administrative decisions made by higher-ups without objecting. Any internal dissatisfaction would be contained and prevented from causing issues by the professional discipline and contractual duty. That was a disastrously incorrect assumption. A gradual decline in confidence throughout the whole locker room was taking place in real time while the front office congratulated themselves on their rotation management. During a live game, benching your top player at regular intervals of 3 minutes doesn't merely impair that player's rhythm. Everyone on the court who is seeing it is receiving a message from you. You're letting your roster know that playing time isn't always determined by individual performance. You're teaching the young players watching from the bench that commitment to the team is a one-way street, and you're telling your veterans that the rules they spent their lives learning about how skill is rewarded no longer apply. Without a true outlet, the frustration grew for weeks. Clark maintained her composure and professionalism when speaking in public. She complied with all of the training staff's requests, kept a heat treatment pad on her back, and remained on the exercise bike throughout her bench intervals. She demonstrated obvious annoyance at the circumstance by competing within the specified limitations and refusing to allow the cameras to capture her. The individuals closest to her, however, weren't quite as calm behind the scenes. The individuals who had witnessed this lady devote all of their energy to this business, who had witnessed the overnight changes in ticket sales, product sales, and television ratings as soon as she came, were at their breaking point. In areas where the cameras were unable to observe, the rage was growing quickly. Because they never bothered to honestly read the room, the coaching staff was unable to predict the outburst. The foundation beneath them was crumbling, but they were too protected by their own power to see it. The fuse had been burning for a while by the time they entered that post-game gathering believing they could change the story. One more spark was all that was required. In professional sports, post-game meetings are meant to fulfill a particular purpose. The athletes are sent home with a clear sense of direction after coaches explain what went wrong and pinpoint areas for improvement. They shouldn't be the focus of an organizational reckoning. However, it is precisely what occurred when Stephanie White deliberately chose to blame Caitlin Clark in front of her roster. Their space on fire without raising her hand or waiting to be acknowledged. Sources in the locker room claim that what transpired was neither a well-crafted professional objection nor a courteous dispute. It was a full-volume scorched earth conflict. Cunningham asked a clear question and sought a direct response. Why does this corporation consistently compromise its most valuable asset? She did not present it as a strategic discussion of rotation theory. She presented it as an institutional behavior pattern that had been ignored for far too long and was now seriously harming the team, the players, and the future of the franchise. She called out the administrative ego and the internal envy, and she made it clear to all the players and coaches in the room that Clark's problems had nothing to do with basketball strategy. It has to do with something considerably smaller and far more repulsive than that. The coaching staff's response was prompt and instructive. White, who had prepared a script and entered the meeting with great administrative authority, was utterly paralyzed. Nor hostile, nor confrontational, but frozen. Because Cunningham had not only questioned her judgment, but she had done so in front of the whole team at a time when every player in the room was already thinking the same thing in private. The conflict revealed more than simply how untenable the coaching staff's stance was. It allowed all the irate players in the locker room to quit acting as though they were okay with the way things were being handled. In real time, the room changed. There was shouting. When the staff tried to regain control, many players resisted. Everyone in the room left the conference knowing that something irreversible had just happened. The meeting that was meant to clear up the narrative turned out to be the most detrimental event in the franchise's recent history. Sophie Cunningham was clearly stating her stance, but there was another dynamic going on in the background that merits more investigation. One of the Fever's seasoned offensive players and a guy whose contract status is nearing a major turning point, Kelsey Mitchell, made post-game remarks that caused fans and commentators to take notice. On the surface, her remarks seemed like typical terminology used in professional responsibility. She talked about doing her job, showing up every day, not making excuses, and giving it her all every time she laced up. In the particular context of a game where Clark had just been benched in 3-minute rotations against her will, where the team had just lost, and where the locker room was clearly breaking up, it was impossible to overlook the glaring lack of any direct support for her teammate. She made no mention of Clark. The rotation was not mentioned by her. The elephant in the center of every discussion regarding the disintegration of this team was not acknowledged by her. Her discussion of personal accountability was so cleverly worded that, depending on your point of view, it might be seen as compliments, apathy, or covert criticism. And that vagueness served as its own type of statement at a time when veteran leadership was desperately required to provide clarity. For a while now, there have been rumors of a philosophical split inside this team, between players who have established their identities and responsibilities around a different system and those who think Clark is the key to the franchise's future. One of the Fever's main attacking options for a long time has been Mitchell. Unquestionably, Clark's entrance changed who has the ball, who receives attention, and who the team is ultimately focusing on. Mitchell's quiet after the game indicates that internal problems are more severe than the front management has been ready to publicly admit, and none of that transition has been easy or smooth. This is not conjecture on a personal conflict between two colleagues. Professional sportsmen always deal with complex dynamics. What it is, though, is proof that the roster is no longer functioning under a single direction. You have a cultural issue that extends beyond a single coaching choice when a franchise-defining moment happens and your experienced players react with philosophically disconnected remarks about individual work ethics instead of uniting behind one another. The management failed to completely commit to what Clark's presence truly meant for the team's vision, and the Fever aren't just dealing with a locker room argument. They're dealing with an identity crisis that has been developing since the day she came through the door. There are now really challenging talks taking place somewhere in the higher echelons of the Indiana Fever organization. Because of what has transpired over the last few weeks, the rotation controversy, Clark's public remarks distancing herself from the coaching plan, the confrontation with Sophie Cunningham, the broken dynamic in the locker room, and Kelsey Mitchell's silence, a PR situation that is truly challenging to manage. Furthermore, the financial ramifications are beginning to manifest in ways that cannot be written off as fleeting instability. The impact of Caitlin Clark on this franchise has been thoroughly documented. Every commercial indicator that counts to a professional sports company saw a sharp increase in ticket sales, product income, television viewing, and arena attendance as soon as she arrived. The WNBA's whole competitive environment changed as a result of the league's increased exposure to people that had never heard of women's basketball before. Networks, sponsors, and business partners that had previously been ambivalent about their affiliation with the league suddenly want more engagement. Now, all of that commercial momentum is in a very dangerous situation. Because it is not about Clark's extraordinary talent or her capacity to change a club that is now making the rounds in the world of sports media. The narrative centers on a company that seems to be deliberately undermining its most valuable asset. Whether or not the story turns out to be true in the end, it is extremely damaging to the connections that bring in money. Sponsors don't want their companies linked to negative workplace narratives. On national television, networks do not want to advertise games that include an organization whose star player has openly separated herself from it. Corporate partners work on the presumption that the product they support is being managed skillfully and honestly. The front office is dealing with a brand crisis rather than merely a locker room issue, and the window of opportunity to successfully handle it is getting smaller every day as the narrative gains traction and player, analyst, and fan opinion gets more sharp. According to sources, the organizational fear has now spread well beyond the level of the coaching staff. The rising awareness that the present trend is unsustainable is influencing the discussions regarding the franchise's future, which are now directly including the individuals making choices about its long-term direction. The Indiana Fever organization will eventually have to make a choice that it has been stealthily avoiding for the past 2 off-seasons. Delaying this choice will simply make the final reckoning more expensive and disruptive, because it is so essential to the franchise's identity and direction. When all organizational complexity is removed, the choice boils down to this. Indiana is constructing around whom? Because the data from the previous 2 seasons clearly indicates that the front office's response, whether intentional or not, doesn't always revolve around Clark. The way the roster is put together conveys a tale. Analysts have pointed out that 2 straight off-seasons of personnel selections and signings don't clearly capitalize on Clark's talents as a shooter, playmaker, and pace-setting offensive force. The aggressive, fast-paced approach that made Clark the most captivating athlete in the nation has sometimes contrasted with this coaching philosophy. A seasoned core that existed before to Clark's arrival and functions with a distinct rhythmic identity from what she does on the floor. While none of these alone would be considered malevolent intent, taken as a whole, it presents a picture of an organization that has not completely committed to reorganizing around its most influential member. The locker room is currently being deliberately destroyed from the inside by that lack of commitment. The deadline is crucial due to the contract scenario. Kelsey Mitchell's current contract is about to expire. Leverage and choices that weren't available prior to Clark being the league's spokesperson are part of her contract with Indiana. It will probably be sooner than anyone in that building would like for the Fever front staff to stand in a room and plainly state the franchise's direction. Are they assembling a team to make the most of Caitlin Clark's special, once-in-a-generation skill, or are they assembling a team based on a different identity and hoping Clark will change to suit it? The current state of affairs has made it impossible to continue